The Houthi, friends of the show, are back and announcing that they are imposing a blockade against Israeli-owned and Israeli-flagged vessels transiting through our favorite piece of water in the entire planet, the BAM, the Bab el-Mandeb. Cheers, as part of the tradition here at What's Going On with Shipping. So before we lock into this episode, we're going to be discussing this little piece of water here quite a bit, and I was told that we must have a disclaimer from the legal department here at What's Going On with Shipping. Today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping will refer to a region of the world known as the Bab el-Mandeb quite a bit. And due to tradition in the show's history, a drinking game was started whenever this name was mentioned. On behalf of What's Going On with Shipping, the staff here at What's Going On with Shipping, and everybody associated with What's Going On with Shipping, we do not condone this practice in any way. However, we do participate in it because it's a lot of fun. However, any complaints, notes, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and JDAMs should be sent to the perpetrator of this tradition, and that is Yahi Sari, the official spokesman of the Yemeni Armed Forces and director of the Moral Guidance Department of the Armed Forces. I bring you back to our regularly scheduled program. Seriously? Was that necessary? Sorry. So, we do have an announcement out by the Houthis regarding this, and we're going to go directly to the statement. Now, it's important to note something here, real quick. The Bab el-Mandeb, cheers, is not closed. It is not. So this is the statement put out by Sari. I'm going to avoid a lot of the fluff here because it repeats itself quite a bit. But basically, in confronting what he calls, quote, American and Zionist aggression and the creation of Greater Israel under the name of the New Middle East, the Yemen Armed Forces launched a missile barrage targeting sensitive Israeli enemy targets in the occupied Jaffa region. The missile strikes achieved their objective with precision. Now, we know Houthi precision and effectiveness. It's not the greatest, and it kind of mirrors exactly what we have with Iran. But it's the rest of the statement that has some ramifications for us. First, we declare a complete and total ban on Israeli maritime navigation in the Red Sea, and we consider all enemy movements to be legitimate military targets for our armed forces from the moment this statement is issued. Second, we affirm that we will respond to escalation with escalation, and our military operations will intensify in accordance to the field developments, the battle, and in conjunction with the axis of jihad and resistance. And third, we affirm the right of our people and our peoples of our free nation to confront the American-Israeli aggression. Okay, so let's take a step back for a moment. What does this mean? Well, first, let's go and take a look at marine traffic. First off, ships are going through the region. We see that right here. They're going through the BAM. So we're not seeing a complete blockade. That is not what's happening. Some people are posting that it's shut. It's not. Ships are going through. However, the big concern has to be whether the Houthi decide to start targeting more vessels going through. Let's recap this for a second, and we're going to come back to this. So back in November of 2023, a month after the attack came out of Gaza into Israel, led by Hezbollah, and then Israel responded back, the Houthi decided to start targeting Israeli-flagged and Israeli-owned ships. In this case, the motor vessel Galaxy Leader. Here we see a Houthi Mi-8 HIP helicopter landing actually up on top of the structure of the Galaxy Leader. They're not fast roping, they actually land. And this is the seizure and taking of Galaxy Leader, a ship, by the way, which is still held by the Houthi, although you'll see it's not in the greatest shape. The crew is held for almost 2 years, just short of that, and eventually released. And what we saw begin in November of 2023 was strikes against commercial shipping in the region. This is Galaxy Leader today off the beach of Yemen. Not in the greatest shape, as you can see. The ship was actually struck by Israeli and U.S. aircraft and has sunk, partially sunk, off the beach with the stern submerged and the bow kind of doing a wheelie up there onto the beach. This chart from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy tracks everything from seizure of Galaxy Leader all the way to the most recent attacks, which were in September of 2025. And what's interesting here is they track the evolution of not just attacks on ships, but also the different phases as the war expanded to include targeting not just Israeli ships, but US-linked British ships, and the general tone of the overall strategy. Understand that over the course of 2 years, the Houthis struck about 127 ships. This chart comes to you from the Joint Maritime Information Center from their monthly summary report. This tracks all the way back from Galaxy Leader. The most significant attack was the Minerva Grocht, which was sunk back in September of 2025. And these attacks in particularly demonstrated the Houthis' ability to reach out and touch ships. I will note, however, the Houthis hitting Israeli ships was a big question. When all told, you look at that chart, about 40% of the ships that were attacked were linked in some way to Israel, the US, and the UK. 60% were not. And this is the big problem, is the Houthi weren't great at targeting ships linked to the Israelis. They're very good at trying to make a connection afterwards, but they were very poor in their targeting. Plus, 127 ships over 2 years is not a lot of shipping, but what the attacks did demonstrate is the impact the Houthi could have on shipping. This is the International Monetary Fund's Port Watch, shows you the disruptions for the Red Sea from 16 December 2023 to the present time. Attacks on commercial ships prompted shipping companies to reroute traffic away from the Red Sea, a systematically important shipping lane that facilitates about 15% of global maritime trade volume and over 22,000 transit calls annually. So I pulled this data for transits through the Bab el-Mandeb. Cheers. You'll see here that prior to 2024, the average going through the region was somewhere around 70 to 80 ships. You can see the 7-day moving average here running through here, and they break it up into the different types. However, starting in December of 2023 into January of 2024, you see this massive drop from 70 to 80 ships down to 30 ships coming through, and even consistently has maintained this. If we go jump up here to 2026, and what we see is roughly 30 to 35 ships going through. So we have not yet seen a return back to the pre-war levels. In September of 2025, when the ceasefire was announced in Gaza, there was a hope that we were going to see a rekindling of trade going back through the Bab el-Mandeb. However, we never quite saw it. What happened as a result of the threat of Houthi attacks, more so than the actual Houthi attacks, was war risk insurance went up from about 0.05% to go through the Bab el-Mandeb up to 1%. 1% war risk insurance on a $1 billion container ship carrying 20,000 boxes is $10 million. And to go around Africa is an extra $1 million in fuel. So when you weigh the cost, it was cheaper to go around Africa to do it. Plus, shipping lines like the idea of putting ships on elongated routes. They needed more ships, kept ships going, and inflated rates up. Now we have the Houthi announcing that they are going to start targeting Israeli-owned, Israeli-flagged ships once again. And the fear here is that can expand not just to Israeli-owned, Israeli-flagged ships, but to other ships allied with Israel, the United States, and potentially allies and shipping lines that do business with the Houthi. What does that mean for traffic going through that region? All right, so we come back here to marine traffic. So we still have those vessels going through the strait here, but notice the congregation here of two large clusters of vessels. You've got the green vessels here off the port of Jeddah, and then the red vessels here off the port of Yanbu. So you have two things going on here at the same time. So off Yanbu, you have the east-west crude oil pipeline. This is how Saudi Arabia is getting its oil out. They're moving about 7 million barrels a day through this pipeline. Normally, you would be offloading oil in the Persian Gulf at Ras Tanura, the big, huge, massive Saudi Arabian facility. Instead, they're going by pipeline across to Yanbu. Here you see the port of Yanbu, ships at dock in the port right now, loading oil all of them trying to get out. The problem you have in Yanbu is this: while you can move 7 million barrels of oil across in that pipeline, the loading facilities at Yanbu can only handle about 4.5 to 5 million barrels per day. The other element you have are all the cargo ships, the green cargo ships sitting off King Abdullah and Jeddah. So this is Mediterranean Shipping Company's post on how they bypass the Persian Gulf to get cargo to the countries within the Persian Gulf. They are moving cargo via King Abdullah and Jeddah via overland route, getting up to Kuwait, getting to Bahrain, getting to Qatar, and getting to the UAE. The container ships that normally would be going into the Persian Gulf now going to the west coast of Saudi Arabia and then trucking them across the desert. Remember, Mediterranean Shipping Company has been a target for Iran. 2 ships have been seized by them, and we just had an attack on one of their container ships that's providing feeder service through the Persian Gulf here, just outside the port of Qusar in Iraq. Iran does not like Mediterranean shipping, and neither do the Houthis, by the way, because the wife of the owner of Mediterranean Shipping Company is Israeli, or dual citizenship to Israeli, and so they connect Mediterranean Shipping Company to Israel, plus Mediterranean Shipping Company does do business with Israel. So what does this mean if the Houthis decide to start hitting the Bab el-Mandeb? I'm actually doing my best not to say that too much in this episode. What happens if they do start doing these strikes? Well, the fear here is that you are going to create massive diversions. One of the things that container lines have been doing is putting cargo on smaller ships, feeding them through this area, and actually using other vessels of other shipping lines not subjected to attacks by the Houthi get cargo through. But if the Houthi decide to attack, and remember, this is a really narrow strait here. There's not a lot of room at all here. Very similar. We saw this over 2 years in this region. If all of a sudden this area is closed, then what you're going to see is a massive movement of goods heading around Africa, which you already see. I mean, if you look at that green line of ships coming, those are a lot of the container ships that you would normally see be heading west across the Indian Ocean into the Gulf of Aden, through the Bab el-Mandeb, cheers, up the Red Sea and out through the Suez. Now, if you need to get cargo into western Saudi Arabia, for example, and you can't go that route, you literally have to circumnavigate Africa all the way around through the Straits of Gibraltar, through the Med, and then through the Suez and down. So you've got longer route. You've got a dual Suez Canal route because you got to go in and out. Not to mention the fact that everybody was expecting this route to open up, and it gives Iran now control over not one choke point, but 2 choke points. The Bab el-Mandeb, the BAM, handles 15% of global shipping. The Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, handles 11% of global shipping. It gets even worse with oil. What you have right now are large, very large crude carriers coming up into Yanbu. They are loading and then heading out and heading across to Asia. And what happens if all of a sudden you can't get those ships out? Well, you can't take a fully loaded, very large crude carrier through the Suez Canal. And what that means is you're going to have to load oil into smaller vessels, ships that can go through the Suez Canal, Suezmax vessels, come out, and then here in the Eastern Mediterranean do a ship-to-ship transfer to the very large crude carriers, because it's more efficient to carry cargo on larger ships. Because as a ship is longer, wider, deeper, you get a cube advantage, the volume increases. And now you've got to sail, instead of out of Yanbu, Asia, now you got to go all the way around Africa. The shutdown of the BAM is absolutely a nightmare scenario as long as the Strait of Hormuz is shut. And the announcement by Yemen threatening the closure of Israeli-owned, Israeli-linked vessels is the first step we saw in what happened back in November of 2023 and eventually expanded to a full-fledged kind of diversion of ships away from there. We saw drops of about 40% of the number of ships going through, but the biggest thing was the volume of cargo going through. Take you back over here to the IMF Port Watch. This is showing you transit calls in numbers of ships. If, however, we shift to volume, you'll see right here that on the 7-day average, we were moving anywhere from about roughly about 3.5 million tons of cargo through the Bab el-Mandeb. Fast forward to roughly 2024, 2025, that dropped down to a little bit over 1 million tons going through. It's come back up a bit. We're running about 1.2 million tons, but we're nowhere near where we were at earlier. And if the Houthis start targeting container ships, they start targeting tankers, that's going to cause a massive problem for global shipping. They haven't done it yet. What we've seen is another cheesy Houthi video showing them launching missiles. They got a real fixation on showing videos of them launching missiles with the worst music ever attached to it. I refuse to show it to you. I just don't. I'll have a link in the show notes. You go look at it. But it's just another one of their cheesy videos. But this threat has the potential to repeat 2.0 what we saw happen back in 2024. And I think that is the danger that we need to be aware of. We're having the difficulties with the Strait of Hormuz, but if you throw in the Bab el-Mandeb, we're going to need something strong. We're going to need a bigger boat of drinks is what we're going to need. We're definitely going to need a bigger boat of drinks. And then the worst feature of this, the absolute worst, the worst thing that can happen is not just a shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz and the BAM, but if you throw in the Suez Canal into this, Saudi Arabia is isolated. All these regions, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, southern Iraq, good chunks of the UAE, they are all isolated. And that is significant. Remember, it only took one ship making a wrong turn in the Suez Canal back in 2021 to shut the Suez Canal.